complicated. You look at what the person whose gospel you're following did and lived by, again, it wasn't very difficult. It wasn't difficult to understand. It isn't complicated. The complication comes in the application. Because you look at the person of Jesus, and the thing that he confronted directly when he began his ministry were the religious leaders. The people who are supposed to be the spiritual heads. That is where the largest opposition came from. But you see, these people were used to a culture and a tradition, and if you look at the way they went about their things, represented therein was the religious aspect, the economic, the social, cultural. Yes, they're all represented. And many of the challenges had to do with all these facets, saying, there's a time when the disciples were accused of eating on the Sabbath. And the question then was, what was at stake here? Was it culture? Was it religion? Was it commercial? He said, is the Sabbath meant for man or man for the Sabbath? I mean, come on, folks. Then came a cultural issue and a moral issue. A lady who was caught in morality. Indeed, that wasn't even being denied. The question that was then brought into being by Christ was, you had the first stone. Not complicated.
Or where is the guy?
Yeah. This person, she wasn't alone. You can't commit adultery by yourself.
Even if you tried.
You need accompaniment. So, again, if you bring this context, and Reverend, thank you very much for bringing the subject of context. You bring the context of the country. Then the question that is brought to the fore is, what then is the role of the church? What's the role of, you expanded, of religious leaders in this? The truth that must be followed was the truth that the gospel represented. So how much of it do we see being represented, and how much of it do we see being challenged? In fact, there are those like me who argue that if you see things going completely wrong in the country, the problem is within the establishment of the church, because the moral authority that they hold has waxed and waned, and they no longer seem to have it, so they can't wield it. So things that would ordinarily not go wrong will suddenly go very, very wrong. The question is, how do you set this right? Because the things that appear to be wrong are so many. I have a question for you, because this thing has bothered me, and I'm glad you're here. If I take the view, as a Christian, which I am, that all leadership is sanctioned by God at some level, for whatever reasons, some of which I have no clue about and I don't even understand. So, then do you then address the issues that a leader has directly, and how do you address it effectively without compromising on the truth, yet respectfully?
First of all, Muga, I would like to interrogate the view that every leadership comes from God. That is not purely true. And I know it has been preached to us, so to silence us, that you can't come to power unless God approved of it. The same scripture, if you read it and interpret it well, we also have leaders who are elected through the desires of the people. Those leaders that God appointed, he appointed a king, but at the same time appointed a prophet. God will never give power to one side without check and balance. So don't preach the gospel only one side that favors one. Preach it also the other way. When the kings failed, Saul, for example, is told to annihilate, wipe out, destroy. Then Saul sees these sheep are fat, they are looking nice. Sure, how can I destroy good things?
And they are created by God.
Yeah, and then
God
he
has
hides
put me
them.
in their path, put them in my path.
Yes. Then the prophet comes and says, what is that I hear making noise somewhere? Oh, we found these things and we thought they're actually good for God. You can see how we play with matters of religion and politics. And that's why the Bible would say to be obedient is then better than a sacrifice. So God is not pleased by sacrifices. And sometimes you see people trying to give to the church in the name of we are giving to God. Sorry, you're not giving to God. You are doing it just for yourself. Now, there are many ways you can deal with the king, Muga. One, you can meet him privately. If he listens and changes, then that matter is done. And I have done that in the past. I have given one-on-one in a very respectable way when Uhuru Kenyatta was president. But I would also tell him, when I'm with you, you look fine. You look like you're listening. But there's nothing that follows after that. And I tell him, Mr. President, then I have no choice but to tell you. On the pulpit. Because the power you have, yes, belongs to God, but was given through me, my vote. And me, I'm a priest. I'm also held accountable. Whatever I do is, I'm challenged. Therefore, I'll challenge you in that pulpit. And so, it's not that we are disrespectful to the leadership, but it is to tell them what you're doing is wrong. But let me agree with you on something. The biggest group that Jesus Christ faced were actually the religious leaders.
Yep.
You know, religion can be created in a way it becomes economic, that people benefit. You remember one girl who was exorcised of a demon by Paul, and the whole village was like, this was a social source of income. How could you exorcise the demon? So so they would rather have a girl live with demon but continue to bring money. Is that the kind of gospel we want in Kenya? Actually, the biggest problem in Kenya are not politicians. They are the religious leaders. They benefit from this corrupt system. One, at an individual level. And secondly, at now a corporate level. I went to a meeting, and I will not give you the details. But as I was leaving, I was asked to pass by to pick mafuta ya gari. I told the gentleman, I work for the cathedral. They provide me with a car and a driver. He is actually here waiting for me. No, lazima upitie pale. Usain, nikamwambia no. If I do that, actually, I'll never then question that same government. It was actually the former government. And I looked very stubborn. And I know people find me stubborn. But it's because, why should I receive money? But you know what? These brown envelopes, people receive them at individual levels. One of my clergy at All Saints went for a funeral somewhere in Kirinyaga. And on her way back, she receives some M-Pesa. Then anauliza, where did that come from? No, that politician who came had given wachungaji ambao walikuwa kwa mazishi 100,000 to share. And you know why that money is given? So that he has a place in the funeral to address the mourners. Look, the clergy becomes brokers. I went somewhere in Embu one time, and I had that afternoon, clergy in the area, Anglican clergy, had mobilized people and taking them kwa mheshimiwa fulani. And then they were given millions that they needed to share. Unfortunately now in the sharing, akachukua nyingi kuliko wengine. So clergy are there in collars and they are fighting about handouts. So I want to agree with you. If Jesus came here, he will not chastise first the politician. He will actually chastise.
So it's not a new thing.
Leader. No, it isn't.
It's what we have seen religious leaders do from time immemorial.
However, that doesn't make it right. And that's why the prophets were there, to continuously tell the religious leaders as well as the political leadership. It's a power play. It's about influence and how people benefit economically.
Who starts this? Who starts this power play? Is it the politician who's trying to influence the clergy, or is it the clergy who's trying to influence the politician?
Actually, it's paradoxical.
It is paradoxical.
It is paradoxical. It can start from any. Remember, both have power and influence. So I can initiate it. and I have the language. I even know, and this pulpit belongs to me.
And you have the people.
Yes, then you chota. But the politician also can introduce it and say, hey, mchungaji, for a long time, gari yako haijakuwa na tires. Nothing is given for free.
Hauna shamba ya kanisa.
I wish people would know that. So unfortunately, we are in a paradox.
Where shall Jesus come from? To come